The next bill on the calendar is House File 72. The clerk will report the bill.
House File number 72, an act relating to campaign expenditures.
There are amendments at the desk. If there is no objection, we will let the author explain the bill before we act on the amendments. I recognize the author of the bill, Representative Engen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. So, under current law, there's an inherent and systemic conflict of interest between politicians and nonprofit organizations who can receive direct state aid that's authored and passed by those same politicians. And those nonprofits are eligible to spend in elections-related matters, even if it's indirectly. When a nonprofit organization requests funding from the state, it should be a common sense notion that we expect those funds to go towards the service that the nonprofit is claiming they're providing for the taxpayers. In 2023, $1.1 billion in state appropriations went directly to an earmarked nonprofit organization, and they have a statutory eligibility to donate directly to political groups. My bill, House File 72, that would end that. This is a dark money loophole, and I think that with passage of this today, it starts to return political influence back to the Minnesota voters that we work for and takes it back from unelectable, unaccountable nonprofits who are doing this under the guise of being a nonprofit. Thank you.
Representative Engen offers the following amendment. The clerk will report the amendment.
Engen moves to amend House File number 72. The amendment is coded A25008.
I recognize the author of the amendment, Representative Engen, who will explain the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This amendment, I've spoken to Representative Greenman on it, and I think that it does what we're intending to do, while still allowing for that transparency piece when it comes to the separation of funds between what they've raised and what they currently have on hand and what they would, if anything, get from the state. And so I would ask that you support the amendment.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Freiberg.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This amendment narrows the scope of the bill. I'm not totally sure how much it accomplishes, since 501c3s can't make political expenditures anyway, but the bill covers entities besides nonprofits. So this amendment may provide clarity to entities not covered by nonprofit tax law that this bill covers. So I'm fine suggesting my members vote yes on this amendment, since it is something of a clarification and it narrows the scope of the bill.
Any further discussion? There being no further discussion, all those in favor of the amendment vote aye. Those opposed say nay. The motion prevails and the amendment is adopted. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Greenman moves to amend House File number 72. As amended, the amendment is coded A3.
I recognize the author of the amendment, Representative Greenman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This A3 amendment is a bill that we talked about in committee that I think is an important one, and I think it is a complement to the bill. There's broad consensus that there's too much money in our politics, and I really appreciate the focus on that in this bill. This is the Voters' Right to Know Amendment. If we are concerned about the way that folks who get state money are spending it, and if they're spending them in elections, we need to know who they are. And in Minnesota right now, if you're spending on the independent expenditure side, you can hide your spending through a shell game of Russian nesting dolls, and we wouldn't know. And so all this bill does is say that voters have the right to know who is spending. By adopting this provision, Minnesotans will finally be able to track the true amount and sources of the tens of millions of dollars that go into negative ads. This bill will end that shell game. So but it's probably a better conversation for Elections Committee. I've had a conversation with the author about the conversation, so on this one, I'll withdraw it.
Representative Greenman withdraws her amendment. There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Greenman moves to amend House File Number 72 as amended. The amendment is coded A4.
I recognize the member, the author of the amendment, Representative Greenman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This amendment also, we had a good discussion about in committee. It would clarify who is covered under this bill and what state funds include. Right now, the definition is broad, and I share the concern. I think that my caucus shares the concern about the amount of money that organizations and entities are spending in our elections, and appreciate the focus on really looking at those companies that are getting financial benefit, whether it's grants, tax expenditures, contracts. What this amendment does is make clear what interpretation of the law already is, that corporations or nonprofits who benefit from government spending are prevented from spending in our election. But in the week I've had since the bill, since the bill hearing, I've actually gotten a chance to dig in and review the language a little closer. I'm confident that the bill already accomplishes the goal of this amendment, and so with that, I'll withdraw this one too.
Representative Greenman has withdrawn the amendment. There are no further amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File Number 72 as amended.
Third reading. Any further discussion? I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Freiberg.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This bill resides in Chapter 211B, which does not define the term organization or the term entity or the term state funding. The bill itself does not define organization or entity. It says nonprofits are included, but it does not say that it applies exclusively to nonprofits. So this bill includes nonprofits, but it's not exclusive to nonprofits, which means it also covers corporations. Similarly, the bill does not define state funding. It says that direct appropriations and grants are state funding, but it does not say that they are the only forms of government spending that qualify. So as Representative Greenman said, tax expenditures, tax credits, and tax deductions are examples of state funding. So this bill prohibits campaign spending by corporations who receive state funds, including tax expenditures, which moves us away from Citizens United, which is a good thing. And we've added the clarifying amendment, which we didn't have in committee. So given those facts, I'm comfortable voting for this bill and suggest my colleagues do so as well if they are so inclined.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Coulter.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I realize that I'm not always very good about giving credit where it's due. So I do want to start off by saying, Representative Engen, that I appreciate what I believe is a sincere desire on your part to get dark money out of politics. Frankly, I think there's just too much money of any shade in politics right now. Where I come from, a lot of folks still think $100 is a pretty big check to cut. And honestly, I'm one of them. So the idea that obscenely rich people and big corporations can write checks many times that size without batting an eye is pretty disturbing. As Representative Freiberg mentioned, there are some missing definitions and vague terms that I didn't fully appreciate in committee. And it's still a little unclear to me what effect the amendment that we just adopted would have, but I do agree that this bill is a step toward recognizing the degrading influence that dark money has in our elections. And it does seem to indicate what many of us have said before, that public dollars by any other name are still public dollars. And as Representative Freiberg also mentioned, that would, to my mind, include things like, for example, the $40 million that we spend on a state sales tax deduction for airplanes bought by airlines. $61 million in a state sales tax deduction for telecom equipment bought by telecom companies to provide telecom services. The $275 million we spent on the dividends received deduction, which I still don't entirely understand, but near as I can figure out is basically a tax break for big businesses who get stock dividends from other big businesses. It might even include the $123 million that it costs the state to exempt insurance companies from the corporate franchise tax. Airlines, telecoms, insurance companies, other big corporations. Seems like they might all have some interest in who wins elections in the state of Minnesota. That's $500 million that we shelled out to them in just 1 year. So if the goal here is really to rein in dark money coming from who knows where, and to address something that really doesn't smell right to a lot of folks, and the language of the bill seems to imply, at least, that that includes big corporations, I can vote for this. And I hope this is only the beginning of a serious, bipartisan conversation about how we can lessen the power of dark money. Thank you.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Greenman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I didn't think we'd get here this quick. I think that what you see is there's broad consensus that there's too much money, too much dark money, too much corporate money, just too much money in our elections. The voices of voters, the voices of Minnesotans are being drowned out by those corporations, those wealthy few that can spend, have their corporate coffers, or just have the tens of thousands, tens of millions of dollars to elect people who will advance their interests, not the interests of those voters in our community. And I really appreciate Representative Engin's focus on this issue. I've been working on this issue most of my career on getting dark money, getting corporate money, getting special interest money out of our politics. And we passed a lot of really important bills last year to increase transparency, or in the last biennium, and to move ourselves on the direction. But who knew it just took a Republican author to get bipartisan support for a campaign finance bill, and I really appreciate that here today. So when I think about this bill, I think it's really illustrative of something we're seeing here and at the federal level. And what I know is if we pass this bill today, if this bill had been passed in Congress, that Elon Musk, who got billions of dollars in grants, in financing, in subsidies for Starlink, for Tesla, for his organizations, wouldn't have been able to go then spend $277 million to elect Donald Trump, who then did exactly what this bill is worried about, went into government and is now rifling through our data and our agencies, firing workers, and frankly going after the agencies like the Consumer Financial Protection Agency that are actually trying to regulate his own businesses. So the conflict of interest issue is real, and if we had had a bill like this at the federal level, it would have been able to stop that. And here in Minnesota, it will equally, the language of this bill, the entity and organizations that get money from something like the Minnesota Investment Funds, the $1 million that went to Comcast in St. Paul, the $4 million that went to DigiKey in Thief River Falls, the $200,000 that went to Polaris in Wyoming. Those folks, those entities, those organizations, the corporations, nonprofits, they also wouldn't be able to spend in our elections in order to elect politicians that were friendly to their interests. So this bill does something that I will say that we didn't do in the last 2 years, which is keep those corporations, those corporate coffers that are spending on the independent expenditure side and also getting government benefits from spending in our elections. And that makes me pretty excited to vote for this bill. Ever since Citizens United, the Supreme Court opened up Citizens United and opened up the corporate spending in our elections, I think we have heard, and you probably hear it from your voters, I've heard it from folks across the political spectrum, that secret spending of outside groups in our elections has skyrocketed. We know it. That's the evidence. Here in Minnesota, in 2020, $41 million were spent in legislative races on the outside, $21.5 million in the governor's race, $8.4 million in the attorney general's race. Those are all outside spending. And we should absolutely make sure, and with this bill, it's not how I would have drafted, it's very broad, but to that point, it ensures that those folks that are getting the benefit of a tax break or a grant financing a tax expenditure, as we heard Representative Coulter talk about, that those folks actually won't then turn around and use those resources in our elections. Now, what we know about 501c3s and nonprofits is that they can't. Federal law prohibits them from spending in our elections, and the amendment that we added actually just makes that very clear. But there is nothing in federal or state law that stops a corporation from getting a tax expenditure or getting a grant or getting a tax benefit and then using what they got to go and elect politicians who then they come back and ask for more. So when we think about what this bill does, that actually is the most important and powerful piece. So by adopting this bill, we are actually taking on one of the things that I think Minnesotans have sent us here to do. They have sent us here to represent their voices. They have sent us here to be responsive to their needs, to our community's needs across the state. And this moves us a big step in the right direction. And so I would say, it's not how I would have drafted it, but it is a concept and a policy that I support. And again, members, I think that if we can continue working on bills like this that protect the voices of Minnesotans and really get out the problem of dark money, corporate money in our politics, we're gonna have a good session. So members, I'd say vote yes.
I recognize the author of the bill, Representative Engen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you for the discussion. I think that this does open up a dialogue about dark money in politics across the board. And in some aspects, it's mutually assured destruction, right? We know that both sides have engaged in it. And in a prior Republican Party that I wasn't here for, I would say maybe the Mitt Romney Republican Party, if I were to speak quite candidly, most of us on this side of the aisle would say we were the party of Wall Street. And we're not anymore. We're the party of the worker who showers before and after work, tradesmen, people who are working with their hands. And we're proud to be that party. And so we're going to stand for bills like this that rein in that money wherever it's coming from. But simultaneously, in 2020, we weren't the party of big money. We weren't the party of Wall Street. In fact, it was double the amount of money that Democrats had raised from Wall Street on top of the nonprofit spending that was occurring and going towards elections-related outcomes. Here's an article here that I pulled. A massive Minnesota free food nonprofit listed a curious job description recently in late May. Second Harvest Heartland posted an opening for a voter engagement coordinator. The CEO, Allison O'Toole, formerly worked for Minnesota Governor Mark Dayton and U.S. Senator Amy Klobuchar, and is paid nearly $700,000 a year to run this nonprofit, who, according to themselves, this is on their website, they recruit, train, and manage volunteers to table, canvass, phone bank, text bank, and go door-to-door canvassing. That, to me, sounds like an inherent conflict of interest. Minnesotans should not be forced to unknowingly fund people who are actively working against their own values, and that's on both sides of the table. So I think that this is a great start. We should continue this dialogue. We should continue looking for ways to make more transparent our elections-related spending. So thank you.
The clerk will take the roll on House File 72. The clerk will call the name of the members voting remotely.
Gander.
Gander votes aye.
Gander votes aye. Hicks.
Hicks votes aye.
Hicks votes aye.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 130 ayes and 3 nays, the bill is passed as amended and its title is agreed to.